under the sun. By the way, it's only used here in Ecclesiastes and no place else. So you know he's using it for some particular purpose. And it just simply means this: what's under the sun? We are. The earth. That's what's under the sun. Solomon is referring to the principles that are universal, and they're not limited just to the land of Israel or just to the Jewish people. This is applicable to every land and every people. And it's from the perspective of a man on the earth who is without the help or the aid of the Bible and God's special revelation, his word. So then what is the preacher trying to tell us? Well, basically this: life appears to have substance. It appears to. And an ability to bring contentment. That's what we look at life, because we go to work and we do this and we build this and we buy this and we eat this and we listen to this and we see this and it seems to have an element of satisfaction. It'll bring satisfaction. We can do all these things. But in reality, just as we all know, it fails to deliver. Because it has no value or power to bring or to give us any true and lasting satisfaction. Even our labors bear this out. All the things that we toil for on this earth yield us no lasting advantage. When all is said and done, there will be nothing left that will give us a sense of satisfaction, of gratification, of accomplishment. So, dear ones, when we look at life purely, and this is what Solomon is doing, when we look at life purely on the horizontal level, the human plane here on earth, life is unfilling and it seems purposeless. It even looks worthless, because when it's all done and there's nothing left over, what was this life all about? You see what I say? When we get older, we start thinking about these things. We kind of look back. It's like, why? Why did I even live? Why do you think suicide is so high? There's no purpose. There's nothing. They're frustrated. There's pain, and they want out of it because they see no hope. It's not because they're suffering from low self-esteem. That's a lie. Matter of fact, the fact that you would actually go kill yourself says you have pretty high self-esteem, because you're the most important person and you don't want the pain anymore. I'm not trying to minimize the pain. Pain's real. Solomon is telling us this. Remember Ed, when he got my scripture reading 2 weeks ago, and he said, boy, I hope Kevin's going to do something better with this message, when he said he looked at the scripture and then he saw the title of the message, Life's Hard, and then you die. It's reality. And so it doesn't help us to pretend that it's not true. These things are true, but there is hope. Not on the horizontal. Not on life under the sun. Our hope is above the sun. It's God. I'll let you in on the little bit of the back of the book here, right? We talked about this before we finished, but at the very end, this is how he ends this study. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. I've sought it all out. I figured it all out. I put everything down. He had the money, the riches, and the wealth and the wisdom. He is the most wise person in the world. God said there would never be anybody wiser than he. And even that didn't keep him from wandering from God. But when he came to the very end, he said, well, let's hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments. This is man's all. Because there is more. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. Now, when you look at life on this level, where is the hope? There is none. It's temporary at best. It's that breath of breaths. All is breath. Well, let's go on. I'd like to say it gets better, but let's go on. Let's consider the precedents of futility that are set before us. And this is kind of neat how he does what he does here. And I appreciate, as I thought about, as I read, as I considered and contemplated, what is he trying to say here? I think he makes a great point here. So the first thing, I want to talk about the cycle of life. There's four examples here. The cycle of life and death in verse 4. He says this, one generation passes away and another generation comes, but the earth abides forever. You know, that statement makes sense since man is not permanent. One generation comes, another one passes away. It's just one after the other, one after the other, one after the other. But the only thing that's consistent is the earth on which we live, which we're born, in which we live, in which we die. And from his perspective, that seems as though that's eternal. That doesn't change. That remains. That's permanent. So there is no way that we, our work, the things that we do can remain permanent because we're not permanent. So there's never any sort of advantage. And while his work might outlast him, without continued upkeep and care, works of his hands will falter and fail just as he did. And this is all borne out by the fact that one generation comes as the preceding generation passes away. It has been this way from the beginning on account of man's sin in the Garden of Eden to do what God forbade. And so this is what we should not only expect, but on the other hand, when we look at the earth, at least from man's perspective, it's permanent. And so the preacher builds from this verse, in verse 4, it makes sense. Of course, for us, we're not permanent, so how can anything we do ever last? But if there can be anything that's permanent, it needs to come from something that is permanent, right? That makes sense. The earth is permanent, so we must find some advantage in the earth because that's permanent. Well, let's see what he finds. Let's go to verses 5 through 7, the cycles of nature. If anything could produce extra or something there is advantage, there's something left over, it makes sense, something permanent like the earth. But it's not what we see either. Well, what do you mean? Well, let's take a look. He gives us 3 examples from nature in these cycles. And we see the sun first in verse 5. So the sun rises and the sun goes down, and it hastens back to the place where it arose. So what does the sun do that accomplishes it lasts? It's time to make the donuts. Doom, 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 doom. Do you see what he's saying? It doesn't do anything. It rises and it sets. It rises and it sets. And then it hastens back to where it started from. And it rises again and then set again. And then it hastens back to where it started from. This is nothing but just a monotonous process. Well, we need it, obviously. We're thankful that it's there and does what it does for us. But it doesn't accomplish anything. There's nothing left. There's no advantage to it. That's what he's trying to say. You know, it's rise, set, repeat. Rise, set, repeat. Rise, set, repeat. You read the instructions on a bottle of shampoo? Lather, rinse, repeat. Lather, rinse, repeat. You know, it takes a long time to keep doing that. I was thinking, how many times are you supposed to do that? So the sun, there's no advantage in the sun. So, how about the wind? The wind, verse 6. The wind goes toward the south. It turns around to the north, and the winds whirl about continually and come again on its circuit. We're going to see some of those winds, I believe, tonight, tomorrow morning, into tomorrow midday or whatever, I think. There's a warning in place for some winds on the coast, 50 or 60 miles an hour, I guess, or something. So, well, where are they right now? They're not blowing very hard right now, but they're coming. And then once they've come and they've done their thing and break some tree branches and whatever else they do and shut power off and whatever they do, they're going to go away again and go someplace else and blow. When you look at the from space and the satellites and you see the world and the storm systems whirling around and doing their thing, but they just keep moving all around. They just keep appearing and moving all around, and they go. But there's no advantage. There's no purpose. They don't accomplish anything. They do a lot of destruction, but they don't accomplish anything. It just keeps going on a cycle all over the place. And then third, the rivers. And this is the one I think where he nails it. He nails it. All of the rivers run into the sea, and yet the sea is not full. To the place from which the rivers come, there they return again. He says, look, even the hydrological cycle bears out that there is no advantage. The rivers all make their way, all of them make their way to the seas and pour hundreds of thousands of millions and millions of gallons into the sea. And yet they never fill up. Now, if I had a little cup about this high and I took this and I started pouring my water into that cup, pretty soon it's going to roll out over, isn't it? But it doesn't do that in the ocean. All those rivers come and go. You think I'm kidding when I say hundreds and hundreds of thousands of gallons and millions of gallons? I want to tell you, I need to scratch the surface. Just the Mississippi alone, at normal flow, not flood level, not just normal flow, the old Mississippi, the old song rolls, right? Just the old Mississippi flows normal 1.6 million gallons per second into the Gulf of Mexico. For you mathematicians, that is 138,240,000,000 gallons per day. Just from one river. There are rivers all over the world, pouring into all the oceans and all the seas and everywhere. The Nile into the Mediterranean. But the seas aren't full. They pour and they pour and they pour and they pour and they pour. Like a teenager going through a growth spurt. You can't feed them enough. They never fill up. Because the waters evaporate and they make their ways back inland to the highlands, and then they come down in the form of rain and snow, and then they get back, they melt, and they come down the mountains and into the rivers and into the seas, and nothing is ever accomplished, over and over and over and over and over and over again. Do you see why I titled the message, It's Time to Make the Donuts? We're bored to death. It never accomplished anything. And that's the point that the preacher is trying to make here. Nothing fits. There's no advantage when all is said. Just like Fred the baker. He had to make the donuts over and over again. And really, when you think about it, it applies to anything that we do. You know, starting a new study in a book here in Ecclesiastes, every time I start a new book, it takes me longer to kind of get into the, no pun intended, but the flow of things to kind of figure out what is he doing? How is he, and understand his style. The Holy Spirit used men's style when they communicated the things exactly they wanted communicated. But it takes long, and so like I work and you hurry and you try to get this done. You try to pull it all together. You try to put it in a homiletical outline. You try to so you can teach it, right, Dan? You try to. It takes a lot of work, and you get it all done. But I'm not done. Because Monday is new. I got to start a fresh Monday, and we got to get rolling again, and I got to do another message. It's time to make the donuts. And everything you do, whether it's wiring or plumbing a place, you go and you get that done, but then you got to go to the next one, and you go to the next one, and you go to the next one. Everything that we do. If we didn't have that, then they wouldn't need us, would they? You know, because if it all got accomplished and everything was done, then wonderful. We don't need you. Well, this is what the preacher speaks of, and he goes on in verse 8. We see the curiosity of man, and he sums it up good here. He says, all things are full of labor. Man cannot express it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, and the ear is nor is the ear filled with hearing. All things are wearisome of labor. Man and even the cycles of nature, there is no end to it. There is no advantage to it. There's nothing left over at the end of it. It does what it does, but there's nothing left. And man's response to the situation should come as no surprise to anyone. It's difficult for a man to find any purpose, any satisfaction, any meaning to life by just looking at what he can see, what he can observe, and what he can hear in this earth. It just doesn't make sense. You know, every one of us knows that our eyes and our ears are never satisfied, are they? You know, you go out and you buy this, whatever you buy, and well, this is good. It may not be brand new, but it's new to me, and it's way better than anything I've ever had before, and I got it, and then all of a sudden, you know, Whoa, look at that. That one's a good model. I'd like to buy that one. Right? We're never satisfied. Corporate America, everybody banks on that you are never going to be satisfied. Right? It's not bad. The fact that you work and produce things, wherever you may work, whatever you do, that's a good thing. Because if people could be satisfied with right, Gabe, if they only bought one geranium and they never came back, they always had that geranium for life, you could be out of business pretty soon. No, we want people to buy new things. So we're not satisfied with what we see or what we have. Well, think about it. I mean, Hollywood banks on this, and so does the music industry. We hear a new song. Oh, that's a nice song. Oh, that's a nice song. Then you hear another one. Oh, I like that song. And then pretty soon years go by, and you've been listening. You can't wait for this particular performer that you really like, and they do the song. I hope they kick out another song because this is really good. And so you keep listening, and then you go back and you listen to the oldie station, and you go like, oh man, I forgot about those songs. I love those old songs. We're never satisfied. There's a reason for that, and I'll explain it in a moment. But and because the preacher, he goes on to explain that's not all, because then in verses 9 through 11 we see that really there's a concealment of anything that's new. In other words, there's really nothing completely brand new on this earth, nor can there be, really, as far as nothing new created. Because when God created, he finished, he said it's good, it's done, it's finished, it's done, it's over with. It's really good after he created man, right? The capstone of his creation. First of all, just understand this. By saying this, even Solomon is not trying to indicate, when he says there's nothing new under the sun, that he's not overlooking inventions and technological advances that have resulted in civilization's advancement, through the centuries. That's what he's not talking about. But nevertheless, these things that are new really are only innovations and not basic changes. If it's something new in health, well, they've been working on making you more healthy forever. Ever since we've been alive, there's been somebody practiced some kind of medicine, but they come up with a new innovation of, well, we can do it this way. We can do the ablation this way, right, Terry? And they come up with a new way to do it. We can do it this way. We can try this. We can do this. But it's just an innovation of what they already been doing. Man still struggles with the same essential problems that he's always had. And yet still the cycle of work that is wearisome and the people goes on. And by the way, this is true. The truth of all of this wearisome of toil and laborious work is the result of the fall. I might remind you. Remember? This didn't have to be this way. Oh, don't misunderstand. Work was always intended to be part of our lives, not the toilsome work. You see, what happened when we blew it in the Garden of Eden, I can't get over it, though, when you think about it. I mean, we live today in just a world of laws and regulations and do's and don'ts. And we only had to live with one. Don't eat from that tree. And we couldn't even handle that. And if it weren't Adam and Eve, it would have been me. Somebody would have, But let me just read to you from why I say that this wearisome was not what was meant, but work was always meant. Then Adam said, then he said to Adam, God is speaking to Adam, then in Genesis chapter 3, because you have heeded the voice of your wife and have eaten from the tree which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat of it. Because you did that, I'm telling you what I'm going to do. Cursed is the ground for your sake. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles it shall bring forth to you, and you shall eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you shall return. I hope that piece of fruit tasted good. I bet it was bitter. I bet it because the results of it were really bitter. I guess it just about sums it up, doesn't it? And so in verses 9 through 11, we read this: that which has been is what will be. That which is done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which it may be said, see, this is new? It has already been in ancient times before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of things that are to come by those who will come after. Old Testament scholar Donald Glenn explains Solomon's point here. He says this, puts it this way. For example, man's journey to the moon and the discovery of America, though different, were both explorations of distant lands, distant places, involving adventure and involving risk. But they were the same thing. And the invention of dynamite and the invention of the atomic bomb shared the element of discovering an explosive. And thus what is true in the realm of nature, the constant repetition of previous accomplishments, is in essence true of all the activity of people. All things produce only indescribable weariness and any lack of lasting satisfaction. The problem is that we fail to acknowledge the absence of newness because we don't remember former events or former accomplishments. When I kicked out the title, "It's Time to Make the Donuts," and showed you the clips, you'd probably forgotten a lot about those commercials over the years. There was a lot more. Remember the plane. Remember he used to be on the Dunkin' Donuts commercials? That wouldn't be politically correct today. Because remember they made Dunkin' Minis? Oh boy, they'd be under lawsuits now, wouldn't they? They can't show any humor. I'm sure he was paid well. The old adage, those who choose not to remember history are doomed to repeat it, I think has never been more true than it is today. Especially. It's the very reason that we as a nation, I think, are floundering and failing as a nation, because we have forgotten where we've come from and how we got here. As I said, come out Wednesday night and you'll have these things answered, and you will be way smarter on the Constitution than almost every quote-unquote secular constitutional expert in the land. Certainly more than our elected officials in Washington. There's no doubt there. You see, whether it was in Solomon's day or our day, when we leave God out of the equation, there is no right or wrong. There is no direction. There is no purpose. There can be no end goal. There is no satisfaction. There can be no contentment. You see, life under the sun never takes into consideration that there is, in fact, life above the sun, where God is. And when we look at this life apart from God, it appears to be meaningless. And there is no advantage, and there is no contentment. But that's because we look at life on earth only from the horizontal view and not from the vertical view. That's why life seems so empty, so vain, so meaningless. Why does it feel that way? We're going to see when we get there in chapter 3, verse 11 of Ecclesiastes, we realize, because he says there, that God has written eternity in our hearts. That's why we long for more. That's why there's a hole in our lives that only God can fill. Nothing on this earth, nothing that we do, nothing that we accomplish will ever do that. Only God can do that through Jesus Christ. And so we also just need to remember that in the midst of all of this monotony of life that presumes that God is not, nor cannot be involved and act upon this world that he's created. There are those that believe that. Even those that believe, well, okay, maybe there was a God, but he created everything and just left it alone. He doesn't do anything. He's not involved in his creation at all. He's outside of it. He can't enter it. He can't do anything here. But it's a bleak view. But if you've ever spent time sitting and listening to some of those believe those things, when they pray to a God that they don't even know that exists, or what, it's kind of like, oh, great, wonderful, whoever you are out there, could you somehow, if you really exist, could you really do this? What a prayer is that? Save your breath. Because either there is a God or there isn't a God. And if there is, you better be addressing him as who he reveals himself to be in the Scriptures. Not in your philosophy. God does involve himself. One man put it this way: God does break into nature, and to do great and wonderful things. He does hear and answer prayer. He does work on behalf of his people. He held the sun in place so that Joshua could finish an important battle in Joshua 10. He moved the sun back as a sign to King Hezekiah in Isaiah 38. He opened the Red Sea and the Jordan River for Israel in Exodus 14 and Joshua 3 and 4. He turned off the rain for Elijah in 1 Kings 17 and then turned it on again in James 5. He calmed the wind and the waves for the disciples in Mark 4. And don't forget, in the future, he will use the forces of nature to bring terror and judgment upon the earth, upon the people, the inhabitants of this earth, according to Revelation chapter 6 and following. Is God not involved in nature, in creation, in our lives? Yes, he is. History shows it, and prophecy tells us it's going to happen again. Here's the truth, and we'll close with this. When we look at life under the sun, we forget that this is not everything. For those who do not know Christ, it appears as though this is everything. And we, nor they, can ever be able to make sense of this vain, temporary life, for happiness and contentment becomes our only pursuit, only to realize that it never is permanently attainable. And that's hard to get our minds around. But the good news is this: when God is the focus of our lives, and his word truly is written in our hearts, then the eternity that is written there then becomes the goal. And that becomes the end game. That becomes the advantage. And it's here, not on earth. It will be and can only be realized when we are in his presence. So listen to this. When it's time to make the donuts, make the donuts. But remember to do it as unto the Lord. There you will find purpose and contentment, and someday reward in his presence. Think on these things. You see, a lot of negative in this book, but it's life without God is why it's so negative. But it's reality. We compensate by realizing the vertical and not just the horizontal. Let's remember that. Draw strength from that. Focus on that. Dan, would you please close us in prayer? Thank you.